Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time I'd like to cover Chapter 2, the Guest Service Imperative. Here's the learning objectives for this time. We're going to talk about exactly what that guest imperative is, the service imperative, and some of the things that we can do to establish the service culture. Um, we'll talk about the vital role of the manager and really being the catalyst for all of this quality service. Um, Also talk about the importance of getting the right staff, the right people for the job that fit in with the service culture, and talk about some of the service decisions that you have to make and the issue of delegating responsibility and so forth. Well, first of all, what we have to talk about with guest services is that this is something in the hotel industry that's an ongoing emphasis. It's just there is nothing more important in the industry than taking care of the guests and providing quality service in all aspects of the lodging experience. Um, and the success or failure of that is really dependent upon the manager. Uh, Depending on the size of the hotel, that'll be the general manager, but it could just be the manager in a lot of the smaller operations and so forth. And it is so true that providing total quality guest service is really the end responsibility of any given manager in a hotel. Um, Guests have and make perceptions continuously, particularly when they arrive at a hotel. They're making judgments, they're checking out the exterior, the signage, the cleanliness, the ease of access, all of those sorts of things. Uh, and when they get into that front desk area, they're gathering perceptions about the level of service quality, and these sort of perceptions, these initial impressions, and so forth, really are very important factors in the total experience that really determines whether that guest perceives that they got value from their hotel stay and from the hospitality operations and so forth that were offered to them. And so it's just like consumers in any industry. They're constantly making evaluations, assessing, comparing, and so forth. So these guest perceptions really determine whether or not they're going to recommend your lodging service to someone else, to family members, to friends, whether or not even that they're going to give you some return business. Um, and so quality, we have to say, means the constant delivery. That's why we have such an ongoing emphasis in the hotel industry. It means the consistent delivery of products and services according to very high standards that the public has set for the industry and that the industry indeed is set for themselves in response to what the guests want, what they demand. And so quality means when we're in the international sphere, that international commerce that deals in products, when we look at that, the international business scene is competing on quality of physical products, and it is no different when we get a service industry that's international in scope, like the hotel industry is. It's the same throughout the lodging industry, this emphasis on providing quality service, timely service, and so forth, and indeed providing value in the minds of the consumers, the guests. So if you provide that quality service in a hotel operation, it's simply necessary and certainly one way that you can use to survive in an industry that is characterized by extreme competitive stance. There is just competition everywhere. There are many who say that the hotel industry is overbuilt throughout the country pretty much, and that in all areas the hotels vastly outnumber the number of tourists who use their services and so forth. And so there are many players out there, and this always has to be a factor when you're trying to provide the best quality, the best service, and of course that translate into values. Um, And of course, it's easier to talk about these things and say, oh, this is what we need to do, than it really is to provide the sort of quality service. So that's why it is so important that it has to be an ongoing emphasis, and indeed it is. Now, when we define service, it really is that process of helping guests, but not just by identifying and uh, addressing their wants and needs, by anticipating those wants and needs, and then dealing with them with genuine respect and dignity in a very timely manner. Again, with the idea that quality will create value. And value, again, is in the mind of the guest. It is that guest's perception of the relationship, that what they paid, for instance, for the hospitality product or services combined, uh, and relative to what they actually got. Uh, did it seem fair? Did it seem value added? Was it a good experience overall? All of those things factor into value, and that's why the guest service imperative is probably the driving force in much of the hotel industry, and indeed it should be. Now, so there's going to be an emphasis on creating a service culture in order to pull this off in any given hotel operation. It's a business operation, and you want a strong organizational culture to support your way of thinking and doing things. And in the case of a hotel, a good part of that culture has to be part of a service orientation. So that emphasis on the guests. It has to be part of the hotel's corporate culture overall. And of course, corporate culture is that collection of understandings that employees share who work together in one place. So, in any given hotel, that is your culture, how you interact and treat each other, and so forth. And that should permeate the whole company. And so culture represents those norms of behavior and thinking that we find in all organizations. And adopting a service culture behavior has to come from the top, so therefore it has to be role modeled by all managers, but in particular the very top managers. And as well, you have to avoid how you label and refer to your patrons. In other words, we don't call them customers in the hotel industry. Remember, they are guests. Um, and they are considered and treated as guests because customers are treated one way, and we have a sense of what a customer is. We also have a sense of what a guest is in our culture, in the hotel culture in particular. And so we treat people as guests, which is a different way of treating uh, someone. And it is definitely an emphasis with respect and so forth, and humility, and it's what people really expect from you when they're making that evaluation. Did they get a good value or not? So you have to create the culture where everybody in the hotel has that influence on them, that sense that this is what we do here, this is how we do it. Um, and so the manager in particular, because they are the focal point of how this all gets done, they are role modeling all the time. Uh, those managers who treat visitors as guests are going to be much more successful than their competitors who treat their visitors, their patrons, as merely customers. And this approach does reflect a lodging property's core values and vision that should be driving their operations. And this is what you can make a distinctive competency, just emphasizing the basics of what the hotel industry really is all about, which is the service culture and the guest imperative. And so if you make that part of your core values and then you walk the walk and so forth, you actually act that way, you're going to be very successful. Um, as an example, maybe I would say that the Disney Corporation has this approach in its theme parks and its hotels. Their core value is on service and giving you a guest experience. And they call it whatever they do. I forget the exact phraseology they use at Disney, you know. Uh, but it's a place where they emphasize things like your dreams come through, true, and things like that, you know, aspirational sorts of things. Well, they make that part of everybody's job uh, at Disney, and of course, that's the way hotels operate as well. Um, so when it comes to core values, these are really foundational values and norms of behavior that corporate cultures adopt. And they describe really how people in an organization act. They guide planning, though, and decision making and problem solving, and they guide your prioritizing of actions, particularly when you're in charge as the manager and so forth. And you have to take those things and transform solutions into reality. So you plan and then you act. Um, and of course, these core values give a guiding framework for all employees and how they should act with uh, their guests and how they should treat the business and the industry in general. And when it comes to vision, the hotel's vision is really just a snapshot or a picture of the hotel's ideal future. And it answers really the question, what do we want to create here in this operation? And so they ought to include in the vision some genuine concern for guest service when are made and planning is done. The biggest challenge for any good hotel manager would be to build trust with the staff and to further that vision of the hotel so you do get the kind of corporate culture you know will be effective and that will lead to success. Um, and then, so certainly your mission, although it doesn't have a lot of detail, there's very little detail, it should be in mission statements, but it ought to clarify how the hotel will add value for guests, employees, and others that it impacts. In many cases, the hotel's mission will recognize that it can only be successful through the efforts of its staff and its operational employees, actually. If the operation wants to consistently deliver a quality product and a quality service. Um, and so they have to also, though, consider the needs of other stakeholders who are out there of the lodging operation. So we've talked about those issues of how it can be very complex, the ownership, and then indeed the management as well of a variety of different hotels and hotel types. So those people also have to be included in the planning and decision making, um, and their wants and needs have to be satisfied as well. Now, that's not really different than any other industry when you think about it. You're going to pay attention to your constituencies and those that have a vital interest in you being successful, and you have to make sure that you are satisfying them. So, as I said early on, the role of the manager here is paramount if you want to provide good quality guest service according to the imperative. Hotel managers definitely are the primary impact on the corporate culture you're going to find in any given hotel. And so they do that by a variety of ways. They motivate their employees to achieve service goals. And in fact, that's a leadership sort of style that hotel managers must adopt if they want to be successful and build that trust with their staff. So they motivate employees and inspire them in various ways to achieve the service goals you've set. And then how do you set those goals? Well, you do it through careful planning and talking to people and analyzing information and so forth and listening to those who have the best information that you can get. And so often that is the employees. You have to recognize and reward employees who achieve the goals. And then you have to implement and develop some processes for how you're going to get the right kinds of people to work in your operation. So employee recruitment is a really important process, and you have to pay attention to it as the manager, maybe much more so than many other business operations where you would just let the HR manager do it. Well, if you're a large enough operation where you do have an HR director, then you work closely with that director and you let them do their job, of course. But you let them know that employee recruitment is one of your priorities as the overall manager, as indeed it should be. And so the selecting of those employees, you make it clear the types of people so that you get good, what we call good PE fit, personnel environment, like we've talked about in organizational behavior and so forth. So employee recruitment and selection, and then the follow through that's necessary. with orientation and training and so forth to make sure that the employees understand the culture and that they understand, the nuances of all the jobs. So again, a list of regular duties many managers perform uh, is right here. These are some of the things that any manager would do. Um, Not have people have to wait too long to check in. Make it minimal. Certainly you have busy times and so forth, but there are ways to manage people and to handle the situations where people feel like they're being treated with respect and that their time is being respected. Um, and certainly the way that you interact with people, you look people and so they can see your face. You don't talk to them with your head down and so forth. So some eye contact is necessary. Um, a genuine sense of warmth and friendliness, um, and then tell them who you are. And then if you've done your homework, you know who's showing up at a particular time. And if it's not a really hugely complex operation, you should be able to possibly greet them with a name, depending on what you may know from uh, researching that guest, getting ready for the day. And then go right into it. Get down to business. Be accurate, confirm the information, provide everything that the guest would need, directions to the room. Um, and make sure you let them know it is available, it's there, just what they ordered, and you reiterate what they had ordered and so forth. Um, and then you provide information. These are the sorts of things that customers, guests are going to demand. So managers have to really empower their employees uh, to do these sorts of things, um, and not have to go ask the manager for help or something like that. So um, the general manager in the larger hotel is really going to be probably the strongest influence on how that corporate culture develops. Again, the emphasis on corporate culture being all about the guest imperative and doing all the things necessary on the manager's part to build trust and to build a really strong staff that you then build trust and linkages with to do the best possible job delivering value for your guests. So you motivate. Uh, these things that you do here are what really business managers do across the industries. So in the hotel industry, maybe some of the names for some of the players are different at different management levels and so forth, different departments. You're doing the same things that all managers are trained to do. Adopt a leadership style, which certainly ought to include motivating people. That's why in organizational behavior and in fundamentals of behavior, we cover some of the basics of content and process theories of motivation so that we understand some of the very basics of wants and needs and so forth and the things that really drive employee motivation. So you do that. You motivate your employees. You recognize and reward them. Just the things I was talking about previously. And develop those processes that are really necessary uh, to getting the job done and so forth. So you really want to deliver the best and most possible high quality guest service that you can. And so let's take a look at some of the components of what that really means. Well, it makes sense that you review your material every day before the day begins so that you know the reservations that are out there. And so you have some kind of idea of who those guests might be. Particularly if they're return guests, you ought to have some information on them. You may know, like for instance, who they work for. You may know if they came with their family or not. You may know a few things. You may know their name in that sense. And so when they show up around the right time or they've called you ahead and to reconfirm like guests will often do, you can be ready for them when they come in at a certain time and you may be able to greet them by name. So consider who your guests are. Are they a business travel? Are they a leisure traveler? Or is it a combination of both? Are they coming to do some business and they bring a family member? Um, so determine from some of that information what they need. and inquire what they need when they arrive if you haven't got a complete picture, and you probably don't. So it's always best to ask them, what sorts of things will you need while you're here? How can we help you? Um, and then make sure that you've already thought about those things. Uh, these ought to be common things that you're going to get across the board from the guests who use your services. And so once you know what those are, and you should, after you've opened in the beginning, have identified those, or you should just know them if you know the local industry and so forth, what people want. You may know them from being a business or leisure traveler or yourself. So you deliver the processes and the departments, and you hire the staff to make sure that happens. And then when you've hired the right staff, there's no way to emphasize more how important it is that you hire the best possible people. There is competition out there for the best possible people, and turnover will hurt you in the hotel industry as much or maybe more than in many industries. So you have to train and empower your staff, and empowering them means giving them some job enlargement and job enrichment where they can make low-level decisions. You certainly have to pay them in a competitive wage so that you can at least be strong in your attempts to fight turnover and so forth. So train them and then empower them. And then make sure you're just gathering the right information. You're doing the controlling process that all managers should be doing. You're implementing revised systems. In other words, you're altering the current strategy as you go along as a general sense of what your overall strategy is. You fix things as you go. You adapt and you're flexible. You pay attention to the basics. And in the whole hotel industry, there are many basics and many different ways to measure how effective you are. It's an ongoing process, as you'll see as we can talk about it more. And you're constantly gathering information and figuring out how well are we doing. And then finally, evaluate how you've been doing through these processes. And then modify what you're doing. Always be thinking like business itself is about change. Things change, people change, systems have to change and adapt along with them and processes. And so that's exactly what you should be doing uh, as the manager. Now, certainly, um, we're going to have to look out there into the environment and see what is going on that we can do, that we can um, copy what some of the practices are. And so here's a definition for benchmark that's a little bit different than the way we define it when we talk about planning and setting goals. In the previous definition, we would say that a benchmark is a small goal on the way to another goal. It's a benchmark that we reach on the way to an intermediate or larger goal. But here's a different definition for you. A benchmark is also part of environmental scanning, where you look out into the environment of your industry and indeed even beyond that into that general, those general dimensions of the external environment, and you look at the best practices that your competitors in particular are using and try and understand how they are achieving the results that they are getting, and you compare yourselves to them and you try and figure out, are they doing something that we could be doing that we're not? And as long as whatever it is you're trying this information to copy is it's ethical and it's moral and so forth, it's not illegal, then benchmarking is going about finding the very best practices that your competitors are using and copying them or improving on them in some way. Now, it's not always easy. You can understand everything about how a competitor does something and simply not be able to copy them. Uh, but benchmarking is that idea that you search the environment for best practices. Now, one way to do that is to use cross-functional teams. Now, these are groups of employees from different departments who each bring different perspectives, hopefully, um, from within the hospitality operation, and they work together to resolve operating problems. This is how it's done in all businesses anyhow, of all scopes. And once you start getting big enough to have committees and so forth, you do draw from different departments so that you will get some diversity of opinion and perspective. And so cross-functional teams just simply means, the word functional means functional department in this sense. You're bringing people together cross-functionally from different departments, and they can bring together hopefully different perspectives to get whatever the challenge is solved. So these are a couple of really good techniques: identifying your benchmarks, the utilization of cross-functional teams, and so forth. These are the things that you do in the hospitality industry, that you do in any business, indeed, to be competitive. So service in moments of truth. Well, a moment of truth is just one of those things where you've provided an opportunity for guests to form an impression about your hotel operation. A good impression is what you're looking for, obviously. And because a moment of truth can be positive or negative. And so if you haven't done a good job providing a value for the guest, then they're going to have a negative moment of truth. And you simply don't want that. Uh, but these positive moments of truth can be turned into a wow factor. And indeed, as they say in the marketing promotional aspect, a wow factor is the feeling that guests have when they experience some sort of often unanticipated and very positive extra as they interact with a hospitality operation. They are just wowed by the level of service or conscientiousness or respect or whatever it might be along those sorts of lines. And it can be done. And certainly it is a reflection of your corporate culture that you've built up in your hotel operations. If you're able to provide wow moments for your customers, then certainly you are where you need to be in a competitive posture. And we can compare this to Zappos as a example of a company I've used many times in my various classes as an example of a company that is totally committed to guest service. Now they're an online retail service, of course, but their idea is we're looking to provide the wow factor. So when something goes wrong, a customer can call them and they'll spend as much time on the phone as needed, regardless of how long it takes. And they'll give them a refund after any length of time, regardless, just to retain their business over the lifetime of that customer. That's the wow factor and how it can be delivered in retail. Well, the hotel industry is service. That wow factor can happen through opportunity, responding to challenges and so forth, and really thinking about that, we're dealing with the perception of our guest here. And whatever we do, even when things go wrong, that should always be an opportunity for a hotel manager to get it right and to build a customer for life. And we want that lifetime value, regardless of the initial cost right then. So often, like in any quality sort of commitment that an organization might make, you would be looking for zero defects. And in a service operation like we have with the hotel, zero defects means no complaints from guests whatsoever. And that means you've got to be on top of situations to get everything working that well. I mean, things do happen in life. People get sick, you get short on labor one a day or something like that, or just things come up where you get overbooked or underbooked, or you have service problems through maintenance causes. All kinds of things can happen to you. Um, so striving and having that emphasis on the guest service imperative is really how you're going to win in the end. Strive for zero defects, and you'll come close. Maybe you can't ever get it perfect, of course, but like it shows here, the benchmark is zero. Over here, this is your goal. But here's where you are now, and here's where you've been in the past. So you can compare yourself. Oh, the benchmark is so many complaints. We're better than that now, but we're still striving for zero defects. And that's really what you want to do, is always have that emphasis, and it's an ongoing process. Um, the thing is never to forget that your operational employees do the work of the company. They are making the money of the hotel, regardless of the investment of the hotel or anything. They are the ones who getting the job done. And it starts at that front desk, certainly. So always remember that your staff is creating the service that your guests are going to focus on. So treat your staff well, build trust with them, empower them to make low-level decisions, and make their day as easy as possible. and instill in them the core values that I've mentioned earlier. So that means you make sure that your staff is trained for the right approach, and that indeed that they're trained for the job that they're in. And so there are some things that they can do to facilitate um, this this idea that they want to provide the very best value in guest service. So always provide that hospitable greeting. If you know, for instance, like I've mentioned, the name of that customer when, or the, excuse me, uh, that guest, uh, and you're pretty confident that that's correct, or if you've dealt with them in the past and you just happen to remember them, then certainly you want to greet them by name if possible. Now, that's not always going to be possible, um, but you do want to make sure that who you're talking to right away, and you just want to be as friendly and warm as possible. And certainly there is a art to this. Obviously, there's a methodology to it, a logical, rational process that we use, but there's also an art to it where we have to be somewhat creative when we talk to people and when we work to them and so forth. Suggestive selling, in other words, upselling, asking them in non-selling sort of ways about services that you have available in case they should want them and so forth, and that would mean a little more revenue um, and so forth. But there is nothing wrong with providing the guest with the wider awareness of all the properties, products, and services. So you may be able to do that by gesturing to a list that's on the wall of services, maybe something like that, or inquiring just right then, will you be needing internet in your room or Wi-Fi, or maybe it's already there. And all you have to do is mention we have these services available. Whatever the situation dictates is how you should handle that. And certainly the training should include that the staff at the front desk knows what they're talking about. So product knowledge, that they get it right, so that when guests ask questions, you can answer the question without saying, I'll have to get back to you on that. That's what training ought to be including, that sort of thing that comes up in the daily job. And then teamwork, certainly. Um, Things do get busy. And this is where everybody has to work together, regardless of position and so forth. And there's maybe a little bit more teamwork required in the lodging industry than there is in some others. And so you must work together as a team. And this does also come from the top. So the general manager is, in particular, is going to be responsible for creating that team atmosphere, for encouraging it, for showing everyone how to work together as a team. And when you do this, you will certainly, on a consistent basis, at least meet, uh, and hopefully exceed the guest expectations. And that's really what you want. You cannot settle for just doing the minimum when it comes to providing guest service. Uh, you can't do just enough. You have to go over and above. This is how you win in the hotel industry. Now, you can't also, as the manager, delegate responsibility for this service. In other words, you have to role model it, certainly as a general manager. You're the one that has to give, if you're using an agency for the recruitment and selection of your employees, you have to give very explicit instructions on what type of people that you want. And so that you, when you do get to interview the final candidates that come in uh, from the agency or wherever, that they're actually what you need. Um, so this can't be underestimated how important it is for the general manager or the manager to be right on the pulse of the workforce that works for them. And they have to always be on display as the epitome of guest service. Um, and there is probably no greater role as a manager you can play in many industries, like a GM or manager of a hotel, where you are the one who is totally accountable for setting the tone and the response and the level of service. Indeed, you are accountable for the success. And this accountability really is an obligation of the job. Uh, and so you cannot delegate yourself away the responsibility. Certainly, as managers, delegation is one thing we do want to do. We want to give up as many of our jobs to our employees. Well, that's when you empower your staff. You're giving up and you're delegating low-level work here. But the responsibility for that service at the end of the day, you can't say, oh, it's your fault here. It's your fault for not training and empowering them enough to provide the excellent service. So you are accountable. You are responsible, maybe more so than in many other industries, certainly. Um, so when you're doing the recruiting, my recommendation is that you have a hand in the HR process, whether you have an HR director or not. Um, this notion of employer of choice, it's a conceptual thing where it refers to the notion that a hotel is a preferred place of employment in the community, in the sense that everybody knows if you want a good job where you'll be treated right, you can go to the hotel. Um, and this would be for a variety of different sorts of jobs that a hotel does have. And so there are a lot of fairly mundane manual labor sorts of jobs, housekeeping, but there are also maintenance jobs and other jobs, clerical sort of positions, receptionist types jobs where you're really interacting uh, with customers and so forth, with guests and so forth like that. Now, see, I'm so used to talking about business that for me, as not someone who's worked in the hotel industry, for me, it's all about customers. And so obviously, if you're working in the industry, you have to try a little harder than I have to make sure that you get your terminology right. Now, certainly, the hotel industry is no different than any other one. And your turnover rate is a cause of concern whenever it gets to be what you think is a little out of normal. But it's really how many people are quitting over some given period of time, and you can measure it with a number and so forth. Um, it You want to keep this as low as possible because it's expensive to recruit and spend the time and energy and so forth to recruit and select and then hire people, and then you have to put them in training and orientation and all the time and energy and money that costs and so forth. A high turnover rate means that your overhead costs and expenses have gone up and you haven't gotten anything for it. And so all businesses and all industries are concerned about turnover rate. Um, you certainly have to pay competitive wages to deal with some of this, but you also have to do what I've said so far in the presentation about build trust with your staff, uh, concentrate on having a good PE fit, which is personnel environment, that you're hiring the right people for the job, that they clearly understand what the job is and so forth. And so in your process, one way to approach that would be to ask open-ended questions during your interview process and so forth, discuss the core values of the hotel property and so forth, their vision and mission and so forth, emphasize the service focus so that your prospective employee really does understand what you want, and so you can avoid this as much as possible. Businesses really can, in general, reduce their turnover rate in the beginning up front just by spending a little bit more time on PE fit. So one thing we can do certainly is to make sure that we get people in orientation. Um, I've had a number of jobs over my life here and there where I never got any orientation whatsoever. I got hired and I was just sort of thrown into things and sort of learned it as I went. And it come to find out later that no, that's not the way you should go. People should always get an orientation. It gives new employees a chance to socialize, to soak up a little bit of what the culture is, what are the norms of behavior around here, how do we do things, to a chance to assimilate and indeed be socialized. And so you have to provide orientation. This is where you get your chance to mold that employee and set their future attitudes and to get them in alignment with the way you do things. And so you would, in the orientation, you'd emphasize your guest service, talk about the values and mission and all of that. Um, Teach them how to work with people, how to talk to people, how to greet people. It just takes a little on-the-job training, or you could do it with some role playing. Um, there are many ways to do this, and companies that do a little bit of role playing, um, this is a great and very effective way to train employees on how to react to guests and so forth. I've done it on various jobs over time, and role playing really is a very effective training method. But it's up to you and your HR department, if you have one, to determine what's the best way to train people. Um, and make sure that you're updating your employees all the time, um, that they are ready before they go out there and interact with the public in your name and on your behalf. So the training and orientation has to be thorough. It's got to cover everything that's important. Um, Everything that comes from the GM, from the manager, has to be about the service emphasis, pleasing your guests. And one way you help to keep your staff around and your employees is not only to pay that competitive wage for the area, for the region, but just treat them with a little bit of human dignity, thanking them whenever an example of exceptional guest service happens. You thank that staff member personally. Um, and you'd be surprised, or maybe not surprised, but you will see motivation, inspiration, loyalty, and a strengthening of those core values that hotels are so dependent upon. In other words, you walk the talk. Um, and doing this is really about your managerial style, um, a style that you want to be a leadership style. You don't want to just be master of the routine in a business context like a hotel, where it is all about service and making people feel satisfied, particularly when things go wrong. Um, you have to do what it takes. You have to be dedicated, and that has to be your first sort of mindset and response, is to look at things like an opportunity to really shine. So give a little bit of service authority out there to your staff. Um, Make sure that they've been trained to the fullest extent. Make sure they understand that it's okay to come up with whatever it takes to solve the problem within reason. Um, and so I think for the top managers, what they really need to do is just be honest with the people who work for them and tell them how dedicated they are to the success of the hotel and how they really believe in it, and that they believe in the service mission themselves, and that they're always going to act that way and so forth. This will have an impression on people. Um, it will empower them with your understanding of how things ought to go. And so encourage them to react in ways that are all about the customer, not worrying about getting them off the phone, where indeed they should spend more time on the phone with the customer, more time talking to them, answering their questions, providing information, and so forth. In other words, just treating them really nice. Um, and sometimes when they have those out of ordinary requests, see how you can really shine in those instances. Maybe you don't have a concierge type of service at your hotel, but maybe there are little things that you can do that people might inquire about, and you might really be able to say, okay, give me a few minutes and I'll see what I can come up with for you on that. And then do it. And then follow up as quickly as possible. And so tell your staff that, yes, that's okay to do. Certainly you're not going to spend all your time, and when you're really busy, it's going to be more difficult. But let them know they're not going to get in trouble for doing that. In fact, you want to see them take the initiative to be creative. That again, interacting with people, providing a service, a value-added service. Sometimes creativity is it's just as important as that logical, rational process you put together. So here we're talking about TQM, total quality uh, management, and so continuous quality improvement is a stance that any organization can adopt. And a service organization, it obviously just makes a lot of sense. Continuous quality improvement. So it's an ongoing process. The emphasis is always on service. You want to meet at a minimum, but you want to exceed whenever possible guests' expectations. And so you're always looking out into the environment for benchmarks, new ways to do things, ways to improve, and so forth. Um, So this has to be an ongoing part of your corporate culture. Now, here are some ways to wrap this up where your effective service recovery really can be viewed as an opportunity to create a wow movement, a wow moment for the customer to really feel like even though things went wrong, you fixed them quite well. So always remember, when a customer has a problem or something goes wrong, that you always identify yourself if you haven't already to them, and then exactly what your position is. Um, be very much focused on listening. Let them describe their problem to you, get the details, write something down. The fact that you've written something down matters to people. It shows them, whether you need to remember that or not, that you're paying attention, that you've paid attention to something they've said. So write something down. Um, Show some empathy. After all, if a big part of your business is interpersonal communication and trying to solve the wants and needs of people, your guests, then show some empathy. Try and understand where they're coming from. Uh, Remember, they may have driven a long ways. They may have endured a very uncomfortable plane ride. All sorts of things may have happened. They might be just hungry, or they might have a backache. Show a little empathy, and don't be surprised when those sorts of things come in the door. Um, you should be anticipating things like that. And in that sense, when you anticipate them, you're ready for them. And you're in the service mode, right? So you're going to make it better. So whatever their problem is, fix it. Always apologize. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Apologize. People want you to do that, so do it. Um, and it's on the behalf of the hotel. And sound sincere. Um, and then always thank them, even though it's created a total disaster for you. Always thank them for bringing the matter to their attention, and so forth, so that, and indeed, you mean it, because you want to be better and you want to beat all the competition and so forth. Okay, folks, that's all I got for you this time. I'll talk to you again soon.